Welcome to the Independent Artist Podcast, sponsored by the National Association of Independent Artists.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. I'm Will Armstrong, and I'm a mixed media artist.
I'm Douglas Sigworth, glassblower. Join our conversations with professional working artists.
Welcome back to the podcast, Douglas. It's nice to see you here on our little call. Hope you're doing well. What's happening?
Hold on just a second there, Will. Okay, great. Got it. All right, good. I just solved my daily Wordle and uploaded it to Facebook. I'm good to go. We can chat.
God, fuck your Wordle. Oh, God.
Fuck your Wordle.
Fuck you right, the Wordle. I don't know, man. People are enjoying that, and I have no problem. You know, when I get irritated at Facebook and things that are happening, I know I'm spending too much time on it.
Yeah, isn't that the sign right there when you're posting Wordle puzzles in the shape of phalluses?
You know, speaking of pictures of phalluses, somebody drew a big old wang in poor Oscar Matos Linares' guest book at a show. I had to make sure that I wasn't...
If that wasn't you?
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a fine how do you do?
Well, I've definitely done that to poor Greg Turco.
Well, what you got going there, man? How's your day going?
You know, I mean, it's fine. I'm just having one of those days where I'm super hyper caffeinated, and I mean, I've already literally cursed out the sun on the way.
You did?
New Mexico's sun is...
Damn you, son. Too much vitamin D.
You know, I'm not even kidding. I'm so irritated. I think I've had the sun in my eyes ever since I've moved to New Mexico. It's a bright orb, and it's constantly just right there. And I'm just having one of those days.
All right, well, you should come to the glass studio and stare into those hot furnaces. That's like staring into the sun. You'd be cursing out.
Do you guys have to deal with cataracts and things like that early on?
We've got special glasses that we get and all that stuff, yeah.
Okay, so, but that is a thing that you guys have to deal with?
It's a thing, yeah. No, we have to have special eye protection for staring into the bright light all day.
Huh, yeah. I had a cataract surgery at 38 just because of eye trauma.
Really?
Yeah, when I was 16, I got into a fight and got punched in the eye pretty good. And so, anyway.
Did you deserve it, Will?
No, fuck that guy. I totally did not deserve it. No, he hit my girlfriend in the face with an ice ball. So,
okay.
It's like, you know, I mean, there's certain things that happen in your life, and it's like, well, I'm 16. You hit my girlfriend in the face with an ice ball from point blank range. It's like, well,
sure.
At 51, I'm going to be like, we are going to need to discuss your actions. Whereas at 16, it's like, must punch you now.
Chivalry is not dead back then.
Yeah, that and your anger meter just spikes in the red when you're all full of testosterone and 16-year-old angst.
Amped and ready. Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, what's happening with you?
Oh, what's happening with me? You'll enjoy this one. You know how you got me all in my head about being careful with my Achilles tendon because you say it's very common amongst people of our age, males of our age.
That's right.
Anyway, and then after our good friend Mike has been recovering from his injury, and you had your injury, I'm kicking the car door shut the other day, and the bottom corner of the car door catches right under my calf and does a good old gouge right out of my leg. And Renee is laughing at me because the first thing I scream at the top of my lungs, actually I shrieked at the top of my lungs, my Achilles! My Achilles!
That is much more masculine than I'm sure you just said. I'm not just playing with you, but there's no way that you dropped an octave. My Achilles! You were screaming. That's why she was laughing.
She laughed her ass off at me and said, "Oh, you are just ridiculous."
So yeah, you doing okay? You got a limp?
Good, I'm fine. But we've just been crushing it in the studio because we're getting ready to leave our driveway again and do what we do and go sell some work.
Wait, what's today? Today's Wednesday. Is Coconut Grove this weekend?
It's the following. So we're heading out here probably over the weekend because we have a big installation for a collector in Fort Myers. So we're planning a day or two early to be down there so we can work on their project and then head over and get ready for the show.
You know, Douglas, I did want to talk to you about the booth spaces Fort Worth just announced yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm super happy. I got just what I wanted, which is great. But
that's cool.
Yeah, interesting new layout of the show. I appreciate those guys kind of working with the challenges that Sundance Square has kind of offered.
There's some new sections of the show that people were, doing their usual conversations about, wondering if it's a good spot. And I just want to relay my experience from a number of years ago. I've done Fort Worth on and off, maybe dozen times. So I've done a fair amount of times over 20 years. And one of the years we were on the waiting list and we got pulled off the wait list for a spot in the show that at that point everybody deemed as undesirable. They said, don't accept the spot down there. You're just going to sit there. I said, we're going to chance it. We're going to go. We're going to have faith. And we went. And honestly, this spot that people said to avoid, that's the best Fort Worth we've ever had of any of the years we've ever done it. So
I don't know. You know, it's funny. Like, I've done the show a number of times as well, and I was in Sundance Square one time, and I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to be in Sundance Square because I've never been there before.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I'm like, I've always had great shows there, and it's like, well, then you go to Sundance Square, and it's like, well, I had the same show that I have always had there. It's always consistent. So I don't know. I feel like if you are on a side street sometimes, you might not get the mass of turkey leg eaters that you typically get that are trudging their way to the big stage, but you're going to get the art collectors because the art collectors, it's not that big of a show. They're going to be walking every... if they're interested in art, they're going to check out the whole thing.
They're going to make sure they see what they've got to choose from.
Yeah, it's a big anchor on my show schedule, so I'm looking forward to it.
Speaking of big shows, I just saw on social media yesterday that Des Moines had their big jury this week.
Okay.
I guess I kind of wanted to jump back in and talk a little bit about jury process. We talked about it pretty early on in the podcast with some guests because we had a number of guests on who participated in being jurors at a lot of these big events. And it's kind of an important topic as the ripple effect of COVID and some of the challenges with jurying. It's just the expense of convening a jury in one place at one time. I think that's an important thing to have all the jurors together looking over the applications and having conversations. What do you think about that?
Big time. I'm a huge proponent of having art show artists in the jury room. Like some of these shows are like, well, we've got these gallery owners and we've got these museum curators. I think it's really important that you have one of us that knows who the artists are and knows what a booth should look like so that they can jury the people in. They can vouch for the people that they... And I'm not just saying like friends and, nepotism. I'm talking about like Deb Adelson. If you have her on a jury, she's a jeweler. She knows she's going to be on the jury and be like, okay, well, I know what the technique is with this particular jewelry. I know, not just who the person is, but like they know what they're looking at.
And they also know if they're using components that are mass produced and just getting built by
100%.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just a huge proponent of having art show artists that know what we're doing in the jury room. And then you can have the conversations.
Right.
They can be like, hey, I know what this person is doing. I've seen this person up close. I know what their work looks like. Cliff has talked about it. Clifton Henry, David Bjerstrom has talked about it when we've had him on the podcast. Stephen King as well. And it's incredible to have one of us like that can actually be like, hey, I've seen this artist. I've seen this artwork. This is what it is, and they can explain the next step to the other folks in the room. So, yeah, I think those conversations are important.
And sometimes we've had our guests talk about, you feel like the outlier. Like you feel like I'm jurying what I like, but I'm not maybe an expert in that medium. And if you're isolated in front of your own computer screen off at home somewhere doing a remote jury, it's hard to interact with another juror. And these shows are not just like filling real estate. These are juried competitions to get into the event so they can be a curated show.
Their integrity is on the line. They have to have they're putting together a great show. They want to, we've talked about that a bunch too.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope if something slips. So. Boring. Next.
Boring.
How's your week been in the studio, Douglas?
It's been good. We've been having some long, killer, awesome days, blowing glass, making some new pieces. So I'm really excited about it. Last night, we just put a piece away, and I'm like, I can't wait to get out there and check the oven and see how it turned out. Anyway, how about you? What have you been up to?
It's funny. I don't have a show in 2 weeks. So I have a show. I don't have my first one until March. It's like a full over a month away. And I'm having a really hard time. It's like I checked in with several different artists and they're having the same kind of like studio kind of apathy. And it's like, just trying to get going. Like Mike Hayes, you mentioned him with his Achilles, and he sent me a video, which is amazing, of him just walking across the screen.
Okay.
He's walking on his feet again, so hats off to you, buddy. Incredible news. It did my heart good to see him up and walking.
In a boot or no?
No,
okay.
Just walking on that pencil leg.
Okay.
Just he's got a little bit more of an aggressive treatment, I think, than I had here in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some good treatment, so he was walking very gingerly across the screen. So
cool.
Mike Hayes and Amber Marshall, they were talking about how they were having a bit of a hard time in the studio right now. My buddy Matthew Nafsker, he was like, God, he texted me one time a couple of days ago, like at 4:00 in the morning. And Matthew is one of these guys that just works when he's inspired, as opposed to my weird banker hours.
Yeah.
But I could have gotten up when he texted me because I was just wide awake, just kind of stressing about the fact that I just don't feel like I'm making good work. I'm bored in the studio. I just need to shake things up somehow, but
maybe you need to impose some deadlines because, the deadlines sure light a fire under all of our butts. It's like when you got the show and you got to get out there, then it's just like we are just firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I was getting ready for this gallery show that I have up in Park City that just opens up this coming weekend. And
cool.
I made like these little pieces for her, and she was like, okay, I'm already feeling kind of like, in the studio. And she was like, yeah, those are okay.
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh.
You texted me those pieces. Those pieces are awesome. What are you even talking about?
Shit. I didn't even give them to her. She was like, I'm like, my ego needed stroking. And I'm like, fine, you don't get them. I scrapped them. I'll show them in Texas.
Okay.
So I didn't give them to her.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you don't love them, if you don't totally stroke the ego, I'm like, you better I don't know. I need some effusive reactions. I need if it's not the best thing you've ever seen, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
I'm not showing it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
I would say Mr. Superlative, but you'll probably start flipping off the screen, so.
I am Mr. Everything's the best or the worst. I've always been that way. And the fact that she wasn't like, she probably texted, if she was like, oh, they're good. I'd be like, good. You don't think they're great? Like, I need that needle in the red or in the green. It's like it's all. Like, fine, you don't get them. But I took my kids out of school, and for a couple of days, a Friday, Monday, went up to Park City, hooked them up with some clients, and they went skiing. No. So that was a nice surprise for them. I got to be...
That's where the gallery show is in Park City?
Yeah, I went ahead and dropped it off, and I had a site visit with another client, which went really well. And,
nice.
Kids went skiing, so it was a great weekend.
Nice. It's really great when you can infuse a little bit of good experience life into our business, what we do. It's like you're going to this beautiful spot, mountains in the winter, and of course, you bring the girls to check out some skiing. I mean, of course.
Well, my girls are quickly going to realize that Daddy did not like school. Daddy didn't like school, and if Daddy gets a chance to, I feel like I'm saving them if I give them a couple of days off. They're excellent students, and I don't feel like they hate school like I did.
Yeah.
But man, when I was that age, I was like, oh my God. And these kids, these bougie kids would come back from a long weekend, and they'd have their things clipped onto their jacket with their ski passes all piled up. And I'm like, God, these assholes. And I'm like, I'm going to let my kids be these assholes too. Right? I'm like, where were you this weekend? Well, we were skiing in Park City. Bring your Moira Rose accent up.
Wow.
So, yeah, it got me out of the studio, and it took me away from it, and I'm hoping that can kind of clear my mind and let me get back to work. I find, like commissions and getting ready for gallery shows and things like that, they kind of make me a little stagnant a lot of times, and I just feel like I really want to just be making the work for me. And like my wife is really struggling in the studio right now. She has all of this commission work, and it's great to have that commission work, but don't you feel sometimes like you're not making the work for yourself anymore? You're just making it for somebody else?
Yeah, we worked for years in the wholesale business where we would go to these wholesale buyers market of American Craft and all those shows where
Baltimore
stores...
and
Baltimore.
Yeah, ACC Baltimore.
Yeah, where they come in and they place orders and you go home and you just,
Well, you talked this week to Tony.
That's like one thing Tony and I are talking about.
Yeah.
It's like, we kind of liken the whole wholesale game to like making the donuts. It's like you just go back and you lose that interaction. And that part of our business, that component of getting excited about what we just made, and then that kind of that giddy feeling of we're going to show this to people. And whether or not they buy it, you're going to have plenty of people react to it like, oh, that's so beautiful, or oh, blah, blah, blah. And then when you sell it, it's like there's so much good energy that comes our way that is just, it's needed to keep producing for me.
Right. No, I'm exactly the same way. I feel like, I don't know, I need that ego stroke, and I need to create something different and wonder about it and bring it in and start throwing it in front of the people.
There is that kind of that energy of like, did I do a hit or did I do a miss? And we really are on the edge of our seat waiting for that reaction. So I know what you're saying, how there is that,
Luke Proctor brought that up with the lamp that he was saying that was for the gallery. Mm-hmm. And not for the... I'm like, you know what? I think he can bring that to the shows.
For sure,
like, bring your weird shit. And I don't know. I always sell my weird shit.
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever noticed when an artist walks into your booth and really responds to a piece, it's always the weird one? And it's always... I feel like an artist walks in and they'll be like, ooh, I like that. I'm like,
damn
shit,
it.
that's not going to sell for a long time. Like, it's going to have to sit in my booth for a while.
It's like, here, take it.
Yeah, just, right.
Because it ain't selling. It ain't selling. You just cursed me.
Maybe hang it out in the front of the booth for the jurors and then rehang the booth when I'm ready to sell. Have you ever done that, by the way? I do know artists that do that.
No.
They've got like jury bait that'll like hang a big jury piece out in the front and then move it.
No. I don't know. I guess, I want the jury bait to sell. So,
Sure.
and if there were things that perhaps you might be considered more of like a lower price type product or something, I don't want to withhold that until the jury's gone through because I want to sell. I want to make money while I'm there. So, you know what I present is what I want the jury to see.
Me too. Yeah. I don't know. I jury into the shows, a lot of the shows that I want to do, but I'm not a huge prize winner, and I'm fine with that. I make my money. That's how I like to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so yesterday, Western Wisconsin, 40 degrees. Getting ready to go to Florida, even though we don't have to leave for a week. I still hauled all of our stuff up from the basement, and I was in and out of that van trying to reconfigure that new puzzle with the new vehicle and everything. It's like we don't get that opportunity in the winter to have a nice warm day. Not that 40 is that warm. I'm sure there was a lot of people out there thinking...
Dude, are you kidding me? In the Midwest, that's shorts weather.
It was beautiful because I had to fill up the van, unpack the van, repack the van, just to figure out what can actually make this next trip. Anyway, so that was my day yesterday. That and blowing till 11 o'clock last night in the studio. So we've been putting in some of these killer long days, but I'm super excited to get back out there and show our work and just be in the public again.
Sorry, I was trying. I let you fall. I'm like, yeah, okay, have fun. Have a good trip.
I'll just be here having studio apathy.
I'm going to go draw the red lady.
Shut the fuck up with the red lady. You're always complaining about the red lady. I mean, that red lady.
I love the red lady.
The thing I love about your work is everything that you put on paper, no matter what the subject material, whether it's horses bounding down the road or the bustle of the city or the rock and roll stuff, it all has this energy that is just so visceral and is so just like takes you to a time of falling in love, of getting inspired. And it's so hard to hear you be so down on yourself sometimes because I get so like, I see your work and I'm like, Jesus, that's good work right there. So anyway.
Thanks. That's sweet of you. I appreciate that. That's kind of, maybe that's just the ego stroke I need to get back in the studio. There you go. Now go
give her those, no, I'm kidding.
I don't know. It's funny. It's like, like I was saying, you get somebody that's like, at a show, you get the mass volume of people who are coming in, and you can talk about your work, and you can kind of get that ego stroke. And then you spend so much time, the doldrums of winter, of not, I talk about doing the slump buster and having that show to shake off the cobwebs. Maybe it's not a slump buster as much as it is just getting your head right and getting that kind of like building yourself back up to the point where you can actually get out and talk about yourself again.
Yeah. That silence can be a little deadly. Something that helped build up my ego this week, 2 days ago, out of the blue, I get a phone call, and who answers? I never answer the frickin' phone. It's like it's always going to be junk or, trying to sell me credit card processing or something. But it was the local news, and they are going to...
Cool.
They want to come out to our studio and do a special story on Renee and I. And
now, you're acting surprised. Have you been pimping that to them?
It came out of the blue.
How did that happen?
Well, the hook was they were looking for local culture in River Falls because they have different locations that they feature.
Why?
Shut up. You don't know what you're even talking about. Okay.
Like, who wakes up and decides they want culture out of River Falls? Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
All right. You're being a little Santa Fe snob as far as I'm concerned right now.
I've got an idea. What's happening in River Falls?
No. So this is the Twin Cities news, and they feature areas around the metro. And so it was their focus was on western Wisconsin, Hudson, River Falls area. And they said, well, we've done all these restaurants, we've done all these bars, we want to do something with culture. And they somehow came onto what we do. And they read our story, went on our website, did our social media, all that stuff they vetted before, and hey, they want to come do a story on us. So that was pretty exciting. Yeah, pretty exciting.
Very exciting. Congratulations. I can't wait to see it. You'll have to link to the website or to our Facebook page when that comes out. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, somehow I'll get it out there in the public, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
very cool.
I post when I'm ordering pizza. I probably will post something big like that.
I saw you posted the other day, you and Renee looking all badass with your eye protection gear and your blazing furnace. Well, that's cool. I can't wait to see some of your new work. You've been talking about some of these newer pieces, so it'll be really exciting to see.
Well, we finally have gotten to a point where we might have one or two. We've made dozens, but we might have one or two that might actually make the trip. So fingers crossed, those will get finished. They're a little more complicated than our other stuff, so I'm excited about it, and I hope it works out.
It's going to be the first thing that sells.
I hope so. Anyway, we're at the point of the show where we're going to talk about our good glass-blowing buddy, glasshole himself, Pyro with a passion, Tony Cray.
Dude, Tony Cray, you're making him sound like you're getting ready to just kick the doors in with Tony Cray, but lean into this interview. Tony is, what I've always loved about this guy is like the zen of Tony. Like, he's just such a laid-back, easygoing, just cool, calm guy. Like, I love his energy, and I just love being around the guy. So I can't wait for people to hear the talk and just kind of pick up some of that zen of your own, because the dude is just, he's exactly who you want him to be.
I don't want to give the whole thing away, but I just love, he calls himself a simple-minded maker, and it takes me back to a time when art shows were a little bit simpler, and I'm really excited to share how he got into it and all that good stuff. So,
I mean, he can be kind of self-effacing as far as that goes, but I mean, really, his work has a integrity and it has a calmness and a very high artistic integrity. So, excited for you, everybody, to hear the talk.
All right, here he is, Tony Cray, glassblower from New Melly, Missouri.
This episode of the Independent Artist Podcast is brought to you by Zap, the digital application service where artists and art festivals connect.
Well, I noticed here in Zap that they have a new promotional program for artists called an Artist Spotlight.
Yeah, I saw it on one of my emails telling me all about the different shows that were available for application. Looks like a pretty cool program.
It says here that the goal is to promote the arts to a wider audience and bring more attention to the incredible work being done by artists on Zap every day.
You know, Zap is growing their social media presence, and this is a great way to do it.
It's like applying for a show. There's no cost involved, but then you are giving Zap permission to jury your images to use in their social media campaign.
Another great way for them to kind of give back to our community.
That's awesome.
Hey, Tony. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Douglas. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. I've been keeping my eyes peeled for you last year. We kind of check in with the people we see at shows, and, we like to stop by and say hey to, and I didn't see you last year. So how are things going with you?
Things are good.
Awesome.
Things are good. I guess COVID was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it all started to happen, I was in South Florida, actually down Key West, doing a little show.
Yeah.
And I started hearing some little thing about this virus, probably down there in just a little petri dish, with all of the ships coming in, dropping folk.
All right.
But fortunately, I had a little run of good shows down there, and I was able to make it through.
You kept your studio open the whole time?
No, I didn't. I stayed open for a little bit and did a few commissions and things like that. But no, my main source is street shows, where I sell my work mostly. So, like everyone, just the uncertainty of where this is going to go. I really no one expected it to last this long.
Right.
And be in the midst of it. But my son had bought a house a year or so before. I found myself over here building things.
Oh, cool.
We started with a garden, and I thought, well, we'll be back to work shortly, so we'll get this garden going and something new. And that went all of a sudden to a chicken coop. And
the projects kept coming.
They did. And really, I found that as long as I'm making stuff, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And I had been making my living making glass for 25 years or so.
Yeah.
And I felt like, that's how I did things. And then I found that when my furnace isn't lit, my costs go way down. The money I have lasts much longer.
It's true. I don't know that many other artists in different mediums really can relate to that. Our raw materials, the cost of having the power to run our furnaces is astronomical.
Yeah, so, 10 grand, 20 grand lasts me a long time if I'm not blowing glass. And then, fortunately, I guess I was just about to pay off my mortgage. My mortgage was finished in July. And I thought, oh my gosh, all I've got to do is make it these few months, before somebody comes and repos the whole compound,
Right. And that changes the pressure too with that monthly nut you have to get to pay things, to not have studio expenses and then not have a mortgage on top of that.
Yeah. So it all worked out.
Yeah, I've been keeping my eyes peeled for you to come skateboarding past my booth in the morning, and I never saw you. So I'm glad that I got to check in with you and we get to talk a little bit.
Yeah.
I started looking you up on social, and I saw your title that you have, the Pyro with a Passion for Process. What does that mean?
Oh, gosh, that's about as simple as it is. Yeah, I was drawn to fire probably early on as a kid.
Okay.
Learned that starting fires, we had a creek behind our house where all the bad stuff went down. I learned that, you start a little fire and you shouldn't dump gas on top of it.
Right.
Gas can, I learned that. Boom, explodes like a little origami.
You were a scientist back then doing a little trial and error with fire and accelerants.
Yeah, to some degree. But I've been a maker since the beginning, about as long as I can remember.
Okay.
My dad had a small workshop in the basement, nothing fancy, but lots of tools.
Oh.
And, as a kid, riding bicycles. This is early on before even, skateboarding was a big thing. I remember modifying bikes, cutting forks off some bikes is when choppers were big, and learned that I could make things without thinking about it. It was just this thing that happened. And before I even knew where to buy a skateboard, we were cutting roller skates in half, screwing them to a board. Some worked, some didn't.
Yeah.
And skateboarding has always kind of been a thing. I'm, just never outgrew it.
Yeah.
I don't push many skateboards. Now they're all electric. I don't kick them any longer, but
that's cool.
Yeah.
So that started early, and
it kind of carried you on to pursuing your Bachelor of Fine Arts in college. Was that just a natural progression for you to go on to the arts?
Well, no, not necessarily. I started off as a biology major, and I went to school in Memphis, Tennessee for a couple of years there, and I just knew that it wasn't for me. I always kind of wanted to go to art school, and just even through my high school education, it just wasn't really something. We didn't have a strong art program. It wasn't necessarily encouraged. You know, it's like, get out there, find a way to make a living, be a professional, whatever it was. So I went into biology, liking science, but it didn't come natural. So I ended up with some friends that were just incredibly smart engineering students, and they didn't have to study like I did.
It's interesting about the whole biology science thing, because it does seem like that interest pulls a lot of people into glass, because there is that component of mixing chemicals together and making our raw materials. Some people find their way into it through that.
Yeah, well, the science I always enjoyed. I've always liked math, but I wasn't a natural. To spend an afternoon working on an equation and then come up with the wrong answer, I found that frustrating. So originally my thoughts were more like going into architecture. And when I was in Memphis, I met this girl who was going to the Memphis Academy of Arts, and it just blew my mind. You know, I stopped by there a few times, and here were all of these makers. And I remember calling my old man and saying, hey, I'm going to drop out of this school in Memphis. I'm going to enroll at the Memphis Academy of Arts. And he was, hey, good for you, but I'm not paying for that.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
And so anyway, that was kind of where I say was the beginning of sort of my education. I went ahead and left Memphis, and I enrolled at a community college back in St. Louis. And I had very little art history, so I wanted to take some art history and just to familiarize myself with what was out there and my interests.
Well, at that point, so glass wasn't on the radar at that point. It was art.
Not at all. Hadn't even occurred to me. I was in St. Louis. Southern Illinois University was right across the river. And I started looking into their art program. And for a state-funded school, I felt that they had a really great program. The art department was off campus. And so it was just these kind of dilapidated buildings that had good junk all over the place and a bunch of creatives. And I landed in the ceramic studio. There were a couple of professors there that just made a difference in my life. I saw people doing what I wanted to do.
So you started in with ceramics?
Yeah, I started with ceramics, whereas before that I was probably making more sculptural work. In fact, I didn't know much about clay. And the wheel. And I remember an early on project was to make a vessel. And to me, I almost hate to admit it, but I didn't even know what that was. I'm thinking like a vessel, like a ship.
Right.
and just naive.
It is kind of an interesting progression. I mean, we know a lot of people, other glass blowers, who worked with clay, and then once they tried glass blowing, it was almost like a huge new rabbit hole that they went down that they never went back from. That's what pulled them in as glass.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Pretty much. I didn't have much interest. I would see the studio back. Basically, SIU Edwardsville had a really good clay program, and they had a very small hot glass program. And one of the professors started this program, and there wasn't a lot of guidance. No one had a lot of knowledge. There was just, a furnace. It was kind of a pile of bricks. It was more than that. But ultimately, it was pretty minimal. We were just sort of set loose, like figure it out. And there's a difference between glass blowers and clay people, you know, and I liked the clay people, identified more with them probably. And maybe that was just the timing, who was making glass at the time. But the glass guys were kind of cocky. We called them glass holes. and I was encouraged to take a class without thinking much about it.
Yeah.
And literally from that first time I dipped in the furnace, it was just an immediate attraction. Just I needed to know more.
What was it about glass initially that kind of started to appeal to you?
Well, I think maybe the immediacy of it, where clay, you make something and it's wet, and then give it time to let it dry, and then bisque fire, and then glaze, and then, all of these steps. And by the time you got the result, a couple of weeks or a month later, you wanted to be on to something else. So maybe it was the immediacy.
I can relate to that big time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We walk with this molten goo at the end of the pipe and blow into it, and it expands and it's changing rapidly.
Yeah. Well, I just found it very intriguing, beyond just the heat and the fire and just the roar of that furnace. I think my education was, I don't want to say it was this bare bones thing, because it wasn't. I felt pretty fortunate to be around the people that I was. I was able to deliver pizzas and wait tables. I think it was back when tuition was maybe, $900 or $1,000 a semester.
Yeah.
So I was able to go to school and work and pay for that without coming out in debt. Where I had friends that were going to some art institutes, and, at that point, early on in our education, they're already 50 or 75 grand in debt. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're just makers, we're just going to be artists. And so I was lucky in that sense that I was able to get out of school and not in debt.
So you were saying bare bones with the program. I would say even with the contemporary glass movement as it is a fairly new movement that started in the 60s from the colleges, from the universities, with Harvey Littleton and Madison. And even in the 90s, that's not that much past that point, there was really an experimental aspect. Like what we do is really experimental. And trying things, and it's not what it is now, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, I liked that part of it, coming from a little bit of a clay background, and just being kind of let loose with this furnace, with that molten material. And the nice thing about the program was it was off campus. And it was pretty much, you had 24-hour access, and anything that was locked, one of your buddies had a key to.
That's right.
So
I remember that kind of thing too. Yeah.
I remember early on, all we could make was solid stuff. Like first semester solid stuff, dipping stuff up on a punny, trying to make some sort of, sticking a hot, wet piece of wood in it, trying to make a steam bubble. And I had no idea how things were transferred, but I knew there was a way to do it, so I would be in there late night when everyone was gone, and I was dipping stuff up on a pipe and trying to get it off of that pipe and onto a punty, and
figuring it out.
And it was just immediate attraction.
Yeah. So when you were done with school and you've got this education behind you, I'm guessing the next step was wanting to pursue this as a career. So how did you make that next step?
Well, while I was in school, I landed a job with this group of glassblowers in St. Louis, a group named Ibex.
Okay.
There was a partnership between Sam Stang, who you know Sam from the shows, Sam and Dimitri Michaelides and David Levy, and they just opened my eyes to a whole new thing. At SIU, being schooled by potters, we had this aesthetic that if you were making kind of a tumbler and it was too clean or the form was too refined, you'd smack it with a stick or something to give it a little gesture, so that it was obviously handmade. And then when I went to work at Ibex, and these guys were just extremely skilled, I hadn't seen anything like it before. So they had this thriving little thing going in St. Louis that I was just completely unfamiliar with.
And you networked with them, came in with them, and that influenced kind of the next stage of your career?
Pretty much. Yeah, I worked with them and still wasn't sure where it was going. I was basically not necessarily their first employee, but I was one of two. I was in there sweeping up after them, melting glass, trying to pay attention and learn a few things. It was just a invaluable experience looking back on it.
When did that lead you to building your own studio?
Well, it was years later, actually. The IBEX partnership dissolved, and a couple of guys moved to Seattle, and Sam moved out to Augusta and built his studio where he is now. From there, I went and worked with another glass blower who had a small studio in Edwardsville, Caroline Anderson. At that point, I was living about 70 miles or so from her place, and I would make that drive to her shop. I would work for her for free in order to get a little bit of shop time.
Right.
And I was still waiting tables and making some work. And then I was in this restaurant that had a bunch of creatives, a lot of artists, and it turned out to be a really cool spot that most of us, there was like a rotating collection in the restaurant, and they were working with a couple of St. Louis galleries. It was kind of a hip spot.
Yeah. So they would display work, is what you're saying? They would showcase artist work?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so, I could wait tables and have a decent night and maybe sell a piece every now and again.
Yeah.
Met a lot of people there that collected my work, that were supportive early on, and really till this day still support what I do.
Cool.
So I was about 30 years old, and I'm like, I got to get on with this. So I had kind of a 5-year plan. Like 5 years, I want to have my own studio.
And that's the challenge for glass, because having the access to the studios to make our work, it's not like we can just order up canvases, get some supplies, and sit in a room, and that can be our studio. The equipment is expensive, and it's prohibitive to just be impulsive about it. So it did take a plan. It took planning to get to that point.
Yeah. I was building a house in New Melly. I found a little piece of property. Just prior to that, we were living in downtown St. Louis. My wife, my son Nico, my firstborn, in the city, and we started looking for a piece of property to build a studio, whether that was within the downtown city limits or somewhere else. And at that time, with like zoning and restrictions, I thought I would probably be better off in the country,
for sure,
not having to worry about so much zoning and all of that. So I found this little piece of property, and it just seemed to be the perfect spot.
Yeah.
It was just rocky, wooded, hilly, thick woods.
Okay.
It took me probably 2 years with a chainsaw and a weed whip out there clearing this little bit of property, clearing a little path to get a fire started, and opening that up to the point that I could then eventually get my truck up there. We kind of sit on a bit of a hilltop. So that was like 2 years in the making, where, a backhoe could have come in an afternoon and did the work that it took me 2 years to do. But at that point, I was waiting tables. I would go out and work on the property, camp out there. It was just perfect.
Wow. I totally relate to that story. That's kind of how we had to do it too. It was, waiting tables, and we at first wanted it all to be like, well, pay cash as we go. We didn't want to accrue this debt. And it was little by little, building a studio, which was bigger than a garage, but it's a building. And, little by little, it sounds like that's what you did too, as you could do it.
Yeah, I thought that the studio, my plan was to have the studio be building that, like build the house, get it a place that we can be under roof, and then start on a studio. And it took me about 3 years after the house was built to kind of get back on track. And I had saved up a few dollars for a couple of workshops that I was wanting to take. A Lino workshop early on.
Nice.
Maybe out at Haystack. I was rejected from that.
Okay.
Didn't make the cut for that. And then there was another one, and I got another rejection letter. And anyway, I had a few dollars, and I was like, man, I'm going to put this into a building. So my first studio was a Quonset hut.
A what?
A Quonset hut, like an arch-style building. Looks kind of airplane hangar.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it was something that actually I think Sam Stang suggested that, hey, have you ever thought of a Quonset hut?
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking them up, and it was like literally, it was under $5,000.
Okay. Right.
So I started looking that route. The building was delivered at the top of my road, which is only maybe a half mile away. And I brought it onto my property a few pieces at a time on a little flatbed trailer.
Yeah.
And my garage was full of things that I had been gathering, refractory and some steel and things like that. So yeah, the beginning was pretty humble. I was able to construct this building myself with the help of my dad, about 3 5-gallon buckets of nuts and bolts. If you've ever seen them, they are just riddled with nuts and bolts. But you build these sections on the ground that are ultimately arch-type sections.
Okay.
Maybe 2 feet wide. And you build this arch on the ground, you stand it up, you build another arch on the ground, you stand it up and attach it to the first one. And, the building itself, you can go as long as you want. But so the building I put up was about 30 by 35.
Okay.
The Quonset was uninsulated and fire up in the morning. And if it was a snowy day, just the condensation and the moisture would rain ultimately off of these ribs for about 15 minutes till everything dried up.
Okay.
But the Quonset was a great experience at a low investment.
As you're describing this, it's taking me back, but it also, I am impressed by the amount of investment that you had to put into building your studio and into this career. It takes a lot of conviction and a lot of faith that what you're doing is where you want to go with this. Tony, just hearing you go through step A, B, C, and D, it's unique that you were able to accomplish all those steps. I don't think everybody could do that.
Well, at this point in my life, it would be hard to go, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, knowing what I do now. At the time, I knew there were people out there making it happen, and I was determined to make it happen. I didn't know any better. I didn't have a ton of money, and I wasn't raised with a ton of money, and you made do with what you had. And I think that's where my education at SIU was pretty valuable, and that they were building these furnaces out of a pile of bricks. I saw that it didn't have to be some turnkey thing where you're $100,000 in and you don't know what's going to happen. My investment was pretty minimal. And my experience, I think, with Ibex and Sam and all of those guys, I couldn't have done it without them, without their knowledge. I had seen it done. And so I knew that it could be done. I realized that a pile of bricks is okay for a certain purpose. If it was going to be a studio that was going to run efficiently, it needed to be a little more than that. So I took an equipment building workshop.
Where did you come across that? Because that's not something you can just look up in the yellow pages.
The timing just sort of happened. It was I had been gathering these materials, and again, it was SIU. I had the opportunity to look at that, and then look at some of the equipment that Sam had built.
I'm sure the Henry Halem book played into it too.
Yeah, that was
read like a diary.
Exactly. Yeah, just huge source information. So, I built everything in the shop. My furnaces, benches, tables, literally most everything in that shop I've built. And that's kind of where my passion is as a maker. Definitely, I make my living making glass, and it's all about the product. It's all about the finished piece. Before that, I make this stuff to make this other stuff,
The actual building of the studio and the building the equipment is an extension, really, of why you love glass. It's a holistic thing.
Yeah, it's that.
So after the studio is up and running and you're able to start making your work and you progressed into art fairs. I mean, was that also kind of an entryway into like how these networks of other artist friends did it?
Not so much, not the art fairs. It was mostly wholesale early on. So I fired up my shop in October of 1997, pretty much without any money left. I had a little open house for the holidays in December. So the work that I made from October to December, like 2 months work, that's not a lot of work, right? So we had a little open house. Boom, had a little cash injection. That got me to February. Yeah. February is the Baltimore ACC show. And I was accepted into this emerging artist program. And so what that entailed was a free booth and a travel allowance. And at that time, a booth was maybe 12 or 15, $1,600 or so. So all I had to do is make it to Baltimore, you know? And so, and really the business hasn't changed a whole lot since then. So it was October to December, have a little holiday sale. Boom, I got a few dollars. December, I had to make it to February. Boom, have a few dollars. So anyway, I showed up in Baltimore, first booth, pretty bare bones, Sam being the mentor. A lot of tips, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information from him. Cool. And so I built this little booth, pedestals, drapes, and just did wholesale with no expectations. I didn't know what I was in for. And the response was good. I had a little run of work, you know, a small vase, a bigger vase, this bowl, that bowl. I had a few items and a few different color combos and took orders first come, first serve. And my shop had been running now for, 3 or 4 months and vaguely familiar with what it's going to cost to run the shop. I knew kind of what I needed to make in a day. And nowadays it wouldn't get me far, but I wanted to make about $400 a day. My assistant, $100, run the shop, $100, and then I make a couple $100. And so I took orders that way. Somebody placed an $800 order, I would mark off 2 days. It was about that simple. Well, the way it worked out was I ended up taking, and these are small numbers in a lot of people's opinion, I'm sure, but at that time, starting with kind of nothing, we took about $65,000 in orders in that show. And, Sam, other people going, hey, you should stop, you should slow down. That's
You're not going to be able to get all this made.
So anyway, but no, I was pretty determined to make it happen. Yeah. So I booked from like February out to February. And granted, I didn't have a dime yet because first orders went out, COD, and then subsequent orders would be like net 30. So I went home and started producing. And I tried to be really professional about it. If I told somebody their work was going to be delivered on this day, I delivered it on that day. I built a lot of relationships. And so this went from 0 to 100 in no time. I had about 50 accounts around the country. Some really great accounts. As it went, I was still pretty much a one-man show, myself and an assistant. And I was blowing glass. Ultimately, the way that I did the books was I figured I'd have 3 or 4 days a week of orders and a day to melt and a day that if something went bad on one of the days or the glass was not right, we had that other day to make it up. So I didn't necessarily overbook, but I booked a full year.
Yeah, but even still, that's a tight schedule right there that's not planning a day off. That's not planning, interruptions in the schedule for whatever reason. So that is quite a tough plan ahead. I've had other glass artists say they show up to these wholesale shows and they leave saying, I've got orders. And then they go, but I've got orders, because then you have to go home and fill those orders.
Yeah. Well, it was a way to be in business. I mean, it went from, how am I going to make this work, to all of a sudden, well, now I got to make it work. I've put my name out on the line. I want to make this happen. So yeah, thinking like, could I do that today again? I'm not so sure, but just being young enough and full of
enthusiastic,
I was
that.
Ready to go. So
did you stay with that kind of wholesale, that working with the galleries and stores, or did you scale way back from that?
Well, I've scaled way back now, and I worked that way for probably less than 10 years. I did maybe a street show or two, a local show. And then in doing the local shows, I all of a sudden figured out, wow, this is great. You know, I make what I want to make. You know, the drawback to having all of those orders is that I had to make exactly that day.
And that seems to be a little bit of a direct opposition to the nature of what we do, being one-of-a-kind pieces. It's like, oh, this red is too orange or this red is too brown, and it's going to get rejected from the order that I've committed to. And you can sometimes end up making several pieces more than what you need to just to fill an order, where in a show, you just put it on the pedestal and somebody says, I like it, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Well, I felt like it helped to hone my skills. You know, there were certain things that I wanted to make that I didn't quite maybe have the ability. So, you know, the forms that I was making early on were fairly simple, but they were still kind of clean. I wanted them really well made. So just through repetition and banging out a lot of work, not just like making donuts, but trying to make a really well-crafted item, something that I felt that I was true to, not just making a thing to sell. It was never about just making a thing to sell. Although, you know, you need to make stuff that'll sell, or the glass business will eat you alive.
For sure. I mean, in your bio, you talk about one of your goals is that your work is uniquely identifiable as you. And so what does that mean? What is uniquely Tony in the design of your work?
I'm not sure, despite all the baggage that everyone has that, you know, enters into their work and where it comes from. I like to think that a lot of the things that I make are original. For instance, I started putting these spots on pieces, and I thought I was being so original. And then I ended up at the Corning Museum of Glass, and I see this piece that's like 1700 BC, you know, BC, and it's got a big spot on it, you know, and that kind of opened my eyes too. I'm like, okay, well, you're not that original.
Well, there are techniques regarding glass that are universal, that have been around forever, but when we come up with our own take on it, be it infusing a different color or a different form or whatever into a style or a technique, it still does become your own.
Yeah, I was just trying to make stuff that regardless of what I felt other people would like, I was trying to make the work for myself. I know that sounds trite, but I tried to make what I found appealing, and then just in the hopes that someone else would. And, you know, you get all kinds of feedback, some of it positive, some of it negative, and a lot of it negative.
Right.
You know, and I tried not to pay too much attention to that. I just kept kind of chipping away at it.
That surprises me because, I mean, I think of, obviously, I get what you're saying about we get all the comments and they're out there and they come our way that we have to field. But, I mean, as long as I've known you, me and our peers look to you as the guy we look to as like who's doing it right.
Well,
and I know we're all just kind of trying to figure this whole thing out. So it's hard for me to even imagine like somebody to come by and have a negative comment that feels negative about your work, because it's so fresh and it does have an identifiable style to it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I don't exude confidence. I like the work to kind of speak for itself. To have to explain it to someone, I often have a hard time. You know, what is it? There it is right there. You know, not everything needs an explanation.
Well, I think back to my talk with Jay McDougall last season in Rare Birds. He says, as a woodworker, as a 3D artist, just like what we do, you and me, he makes things that, in his opinion, don't suck. And he hopes that when he goes out, he'll find other people who think the same.
Yeah.
And that's kind of our quest, you know, is that that's where it becomes personal to us, is is making something that excites us and that when we look at it at the end of the day, we're proud of.
Yeah, there are all these little discoveries that you make.
Mm-hmm.
Little things that you need to retain, like, okay, well, how did I make that? How did that work that way? And why did it work that way? And so to me, each of those little discoveries kind of leads to the next.
Would you say some of these discoveries are also kind of process oriented? Because I'm getting from your talk too that if you have this passion for the process, it's almost like, well, yeah, you look at the piece when it's done and you have a feeling or reaction to it. But then there's also that challenge component of, well, what if I did this like in an Encomo style, or what if I did this as a double axis? And it's like adding maybe another challenge to yourself to see if you can push it in a different direction.
Yeah, I like to be challenged by the work. And glass, the material itself, is very challenging. It's not going to make itself. And a lot of them are wrestling matches. It's that give and take that I guess I thrive on that. And, you can be easily defeated. It is a worthy opponent, and it will beat you down. You know how it is at the end of the day. You're kind of stoked on what you made, and then you open up the oven the next day and you look at it, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's just defeating. And then, I take that work out of the oven, I close the lid, I fire it back up, and it's a new day. Okay, try and learn from those mistakes and move forward. Yeah,
those things are immediately go in the rearview mirror, the successes and the failures.
Right.
And then it's like, let's play with it today. What are we going to make today?
Yeah. So my business model hasn't changed a whole lot. It's make some work, take it out, hope for the best. And I guess it's changed in the fact that it's less wholesale and more retail. I was kind of fading out some of my wholesale accounts. It was back when the economy was pretty strong, talking before 2008, before the whole housing bubble burst. Nowadays, it's a lot of consignment. Back then, it was all wholesale. I would ship work out on a net 30 basis. Most of the galleries and museum shops were really great about paying you a net 30, but I didn't have time to be a bill collector. I had too many accounts. It was too much management, where I would spend so much time sending invoices, packing work, shipping work. That became challenging because it was taking some of the fun out of it, where ultimately, I just want to make the work.
Totally. At that point, at the 2007-8 period, places like People's Pottery, go out of business. They've got like 12 locations across the country, and you could be on the hook for $30,000 worth of work that you're not getting paid for, and you're chasing them down. It became such a challenging period for glassmakers on whatever scale that they were working in the wholesale market.
Yeah.
I just want to jump back to talking about your work. Being a craft artist, we can relate to this idea that when you look at the work, you say, you don't make the work so that somebody can step back and have a moral to ponder or say, what's the deeper meaning behind it? It's really just the thing you're making, and it's about it, right?
It is about that. Early on, my work was probably much more narrative. The work that I'm drawn to is probably typically more narrative, the art stuff about it, the content and the context and all of that. And that's typically what I'm drawn to. And a lot of my work early on were sorely one-off pieces, kind of telling these little stories, real, to me, kind of just heady personal work. And pieces that I would spend, a couple of months drawing on. And
like that sandblasting and
the sandblast,
etching,
some
engraving.
of the early sandblasted pieces that all told a story, and you kind of spill your guts. And I remember early on, before having any gallery representation and trying to shop my work around, sending some slides out to galleries or trying to, cold call and show them some work. And I had a gallery owner early on that said to me, Tony, people that buy art They buy art to make them happy, and your work is depressing.
Really? So this moral that you were investigating early on was depressing people.
And I didn't see it that way at all. To me, they were just kind of humorous little pieces, but they all had a narrative.
Yeah.
And I'll go back and make a few pieces every now and again that are surely one-offs, this narrative thing. And, the work that I surround myself with is usually it's not just a pretty picture or a pretty object or something like that. And when I started the studio, I was making these one-off pieces that I would invest all of this time, and there was just no way to sell them for enough money to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So I felt that I needed a little line of work. I needed to become a better glass blower, more efficient, and hone the forms that I wanted to make. And then someday step back from that and make these surely one-off pieces.
But you never really seem like to be the kind of glass blower who runs around the country doing lots of shows, making a selection of little baubles. You've always made stuff that starts at a higher echelon than some glass blowers, would you say?
Well, I have a wide range of price points. I still generally feel that if I'm not making it to make $1, that is, people say, oh yeah, sure, right, you got to. I'm a terrible businessman. My accountant talks to me, he's like, oh my God, you got to get somebody in, you got to change some things here, man, you got to do this a different way, you got to get some people in there making that stuff, and you got to pick your shows better, and gosh, I'm a pretty simple-minded maker. Yeah, even on my low-end stuff, I realized that I still love making that work. And if I didn't, I wouldn't make it. It's not this elitist product. I don't want it to be that, but I put a lot into the work, and I've got bills just like everyone else, and they need to be paid. So I make a wide range of stuff. And anytime I feel that I have a good show, it's because I'm selling all across my price point, from low end, mid range, high end. And on the street, prices, they range, $80 to, a couple $1,000s. I don't price stuff much above that on the street. And maybe only because I don't have work that's, I don't have a $5,000 piece to sell on the street. They're hard to transport around. So,
and I mean, we're upfront and personal. We hear every reaction. We see that shocked look when somebody steps up and sees something and walks away. And if that happens once, it's whatever. But if it's a pattern, then okay, what I'm presenting here is kind of out of range. So we really get a sense of what we can sell and what people will want to buy.
Yeah, well, there are times where, the guy that walks in and he puts his thumb over the price. He's like, check this out, honey. Just check what do you guess? How much do you think? And all I can say is, gosh, if you had any idea what went into that, all of the years, all of the pieces that didn't survive. And there are times that, we're making less than minimum wage. There are days that cost me money that I don't make a dime. Everybody else is getting paid, but I don't make a dime. So all that I can say is, gosh, it's just not for you. Nothing personal, but hey, that one's not for you.
And if they're trying to make it into a hard sell, then by standing behind that, it either moves them along, or they then will appreciate the value and they will give you what you need for it.
Yeah, and then other people are like, oh my gosh, your work's so reasonable. And I say, well, get two of them.
Buy it up. Get two. Well, I didn't want to finish this talk without, you've talked about having assistants in your studio over the years, and I know that one of your assistants, Nico, who you talked about earlier, has also gone on to kind of follow in your footsteps a bit. Let's talk about watching him through the years.
Yeah, well, I've been accused of being a bad influence, And Nico has been in the shop since he was a little kid.
Oh.
We designed some pieces really early on. Probably, 6 years old or so. And he would come in and he would draw some pieces out on the floor. They were these little monster heads on sticks, and we called them wildflowers. And the first little group was for my wife, and they were like Mother's Day flowers. They kind of resembled flowers and monster heads. And all of a sudden, they were a really popular little unit. So early on, he's coming in there and he's designing, and it was just such a rush.
It's like unfiltered creativity right there.
Yeah, it was just raw, no baggage, just let it flow.
Which I want to say, every glass blowing studio has got chalk that we draw our forms right there on the floor, and we're looking at it as we work. So you were saying draw it on the floor. I'm wondering if people who don't do glass would even know what that meant.
Got you. But yeah, so he worked for me. It was a little job. It was a way to make a few bucks. And from his designs, his wildflowers, I'd put a little bit of money away for him. He realized that, okay, this is how it works, you know.
He got the commerce side of it.
Well, he's a bit of a capitalist, a little more than I was. Early
but
on,
you can take your idea and you can turn it into something, and then how it will come back. So that extra added component, you could have just drawn it and made it, and it would have been something that displayed in his room. But you also furthered it as the next step with it.
Yeah, we made lots and lots and lots of those pieces, and it was really fun. And then it got to a point where he was old enough to bring me a punty, where I wasn't so concerned about him getting burned. You know, he at this point had been in the studio a lot, so but he's never had a real job outside of the studio. You know, and there were other friends who said, "Oh, you should get him a job at McDonald's. Show him what work is."
What the real world is.
You know, some of his teachers and counselors are like, "Oh my gosh, why are you doing that? You know, don't make a glass blower out of the guy." And to me, I had the perfect life. You know, for me, not for everyone, but for me, it was just perfect.
Well, what was that like when you said the counselors would be like, "Don't do that"? Did it kind of shock you that the reaction was that you were somehow like ruining your kid or something, or did you just discount it?
Well, it's not that I discounted it. I was concerned that I was doing it all wrong. I mean, I believed in what I did, but I sometimes wonder, would he have been a glass blower if I was not? Would he have found that? Well, he's hyper creative and he just flows, and he always kind of has that way. He's dyslexic. And so I think that his ability to express himself creatively is definitely heightened. And early on, I worried about him, like, what is he going to do? And then me with my ego, him being a glassblower, my ego says, oh my gosh, he's going to have to live under my umbrella, you know? and then
he's found his own umbrella to be under.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, absolutely. His work is so good. And just to be a maker and to be a dad and to see your kid just excel. Yeah. I couldn't be more proud of the work that he makes. And he works in the studio with me. We've got a flame working shop in there and a boro shop and a soft glass shop.
Well, for those listening who don't know the difference, can you describe his glass blowing technique, how it differs from how you work?
Gosh, it's really night and day. They have the same name. They're both called glass, but they are two completely different materials. And my work is made out of a furnace, big unit, runs at a couple thousand degrees, 24/7. And his work is made on these torches, propane and oxygen mixed torches, surface mixed torches. It's just a different beast altogether.
And the scale is different too. And his is more in a smaller size than anything you'd make, and more delicate.
Yeah, the scale is different. Everything about it is different. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the boro, and I find it really just extremely challenging. And maybe it's because I have so much history with soft glass that, you know, you'd think it would be this natural thing, like, oh, you can do that. Well, you can make boro, but it's really challenging. And for me, I see just the glass movement. The work that I am drawn to in glass lately is mostly boro. Some of it is just so good. These kids are making just such good stuff.
Wow.
You know, to have the ability to be in the shop with him, it's just a treat.
And does it push you into different directions at all?
Yeah, during COVID, when my furnace was shut down, I spent a lot more time on the torch. I thought, man, I want to invest a little bit of time here and try and figure this out. And the learning curve is very slow. He has years on me, years of knowledge. And sometimes people say, oh, well, he got a lot of that from you. And really, he's figured so much out on his own.
Yeah.
And there were definitely, as me, a designer, and there were certain details of his work that I could say, hey, well, think about this, or, we could bounce things off of one another. And he was receptive and quick to say, yeah, I agree with that, or quick to say, no, I don't think you're right there. He had his own opinion, and he makes his own work. When he was ready to graduate, and I kind of wanted him to go to art school. If you're going to make stuff, let's, get that art education. And he was like, oh my gosh, please don't make me do that.
Oh,
and had really pretty much zero interest. And so as a result, his counselors, people were like, oh my gosh, what is the guy going to do?
Yeah.
But he had started working on the torch early on, and he was going to some music festivals, and he was hustling his work. He was finding a different audience.
He found a niche that is different than we've ever pursued. I mean, he's not doing road shows. It looks like his social media presence is like massive and huge. And it looks like the online stuff, he sells online pretty well. At least that's the appearance it gives.
Yeah, well, he's mostly sells wholesale. He's getting ready for a trade show. I go to South Florida in February, and he does a big show in Vegas. He goes there with an inventory of work. I travel cross country with a truck and a trailer filled to the gills, and he flies on an airplane with a couple of cases of glass.
Like he's doing something right.
Yeah. Their shows are not all about the display, the fancy booth, and all of that. It's kind of like some of our shows were back in the day, where it's like, a table or a blanket on the ground and a few pieces out. I mean, these are a bit more refined than that, but pretty much folding tables covered with a skirt, and it's all about the work.
Wow, that seems a lot simpler. We travel with so much stuff so that the work looks good in a good environment, in a good display. And we've pushed ourselves to make things so complicated. Personally, me and my wife, we've pushed ourselves to be so complicated that at the end of the day, you kind of wonder, would it present as well or sell as well in a little bit of a simpler setup? So, I mean.
Yeah, well, I know all about it. I've got a complicated display, so.
Well, that's really exciting. I remember the first time when Nico was just getting started with this, and we were across the street from each other at a show. I could see the pride on your face, and you were saying, he's killing it, and we're planning to do some collabs. He's making me some toppers for some pieces, and it's just got to be a really great life that you describe a process of building your studio, of really staying invested in your time and in every little piece along the way, not just in the glass you make, but in the life you're creating, and then to have your son share that with you and not have it be like a carbon copy, but it's like he's an extension of what you've built,
Yeah, I couldn't be more proud, and I know to some people it's like, oh, come on, get on with it. But yeah, to have him making a body of work that is his own, it's not this thing off of just kind of copying or modifying what I did, is it's such a rush. And to be in there on the daily with not only him, but some of his friends that can come through and they can collaborate on pieces, and just to have a bit more energy, because my shop is out. I'm about 45 minutes from downtown St. Louis. So there's a lot of public access places these days that someone can go to blow glass, So my spot out in the woods, it's just me and an assistant, and we can get in there and kind of get in the zone and make the work. But then to be able to have him in there, and then some other really talented, I call them kids, but these young guys and their young guns that are just fearless, and they're just making the work and putting it out there. It's really great to see, and inspiring to me, to see them just making it happen.
So what is in store for you this next year? Are you going to kind of do the same attempt at the way things were before the pandemic? Is there anything new that is influencing how you make your choices in 2022?
Well, I had slowed down a little bit. My furnace is lit pretty much 24/7. I try not to be a slave to it anymore. And it's sort of the way that I built my life, is that, hey, if I want to take off and I want to go dirt biking a day, I can do that. That's where I work for myself. You know, if I want to go skateboard and if I want to hang out and do something else. I mean, we all work really hard, and the group is a hard working crew out on the street. And so to take advantage of some of the opportunities and live. So I had slowed down a little bit, realizing that not the less I work, the less it costs me. But some days when you're in there just, you know, making the product, make it just the monotony. So I had backed off that. A lot of my pieces have become more kind of one-off, a lot more time spent carving, sandblasting, drawing. Yeah, I don't know that I will change much now that the shows are back up. You know, I get from one show to the next.
Right.
And I'm getting ready for this little floor to run, 3 shows, 3's back to back to back, which is a lot for me. I know some people move out on the road for a long time, but usually 2 is about my limit, you know, hit 2 back to back. But yeah, I'm going down for 3, and we'll see what happens. I've been just going hard for quite a few months now, trying to build up some inventory.
I like what you said about getting the balance in there. I think a lot of us learned that during COVID. Is you said it, part of it's about living too. So I love hearing that. And I mean, we are aging. I mean, are you noticing any of the physical challenges with glass playing its toll on you?
I still feel pretty good. You know, it's hard work.
You're in great shape.
We keep going.
Yeah.
It's only when I, you know, look in a camera or look in a mirror that I'm like, okay, well, time hasn't been so kind, you know.
You're telling me these hands don't start stiffening up and the shoulders aren't having challenges with blowing? You're still the same?
I try and ignore that stuff. Yeah, no, I got a little something going on in my shoulder, but I try and ignore it.
Well, I won't draw attention to it
away. You know? Got to work through it. Got to work it out.
That's right. Well, Tony, this has been fun. Thanks for taking time and telling us all about you. I mean, I've known you for 20-some years, and I've learned a lot of new stuff about you today, and I know other people will enjoy hearing it too.
Well, I need to catch up, learn more about you sometime.
Sounds good. We'll do that in Miami.
I'll have to interview you next time.
All right. Well, that's the plan. All right. Take care, Tony.
Okay, Doug. Hey, thanks. Yeah, take care.
Man, great talk with Tony. Douglas, really appreciate you sitting down and talking with one of my kind of art show heroes. I know, like, his work and my work could not be any more different, but the way he goes about his business is just incredibly inspiring to me.
You know, I love the part of the talk where he says he makes this stuff, talking about his studio equipment, builds a studio. He makes this stuff to make this other stuff. And he really just, at his core, is somebody who needs to make, just to create. He had to take a break from COVID, and he couldn't work on glass. He tried glass on the torch, and he tried other things that was keeping him moving that way. So I thought that was a really interesting part of who he is.
Yeah, that and kind of the family aspect of it, and hearing about his son, and just cool, inspiring all the way around. Appreciate that one.
So next week, Will, who are you sitting down to talk with?
You know, I've got a couple of people that I have in the works, and they are all leaving for Florida shows.
Okay.
So I am going to talk to Betty Yeager, an amazing jeweler out of the Twin Cities area. We're going to sit down and talk about turning your business around from doing art shows into going pretty much only online, and she is a rock star in that format.
Cool.
So we're going to get a little inspired in that way and try to figure out, get inside her head, talk about some of the social issues that Minneapolis has dealt with over the past couple of years, dig down into some Instagram sales. She's a rock star, and I cannot wait for you guys to hear her talk.
Hey, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing all about that. And everyone, thanks so much for all of your engagement on the social media platforms. Feel free to jump on to any of your streaming apps and leave us a review. We really love hearing what you think of the show, and it helps the show go further.
It does. If there's a topic that you want us to address, feel free to reach out, or if you have a question or a person that you're interested in hearing us talk to. We may or may not take your advice. I hate advice. Douglas is probably, he can attest to, but you know, maybe it might get through a chink in the armor. We'll see how it goes.
You never know what's going to spark Will to say, hey, I want to talk about that, or I don't want to talk about that
shit. Sometimes the ones I don't want to talk about are some of the best talk, so you never know how it's going to go.
That's right. All right, guys. Looking forward to seeing everybody face-to-face down in Miami.
Good luck out there on the road, Douglas. It's good to see you, sir.
All right. Take care. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by the National Association of Independent Artists. The website is naiaartists.org.
Also sponsored by Zapplication. That's zapplication.org. And while you're at it, check out Will's website at willarmstrongart.com and my website at sigwithglass.com.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when we release new episodes.